When an empath is hurt repeatedly by an avoidant, the damage isn't loud, there are no dramatic reactions, no sudden coldness, no explosive endings, nothing on the surface looks broken. Instead, the pain turns inward, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. An empath doesn't stop loving suddenly. They don't wake up one day and decide to detach. What happens instead is far more subtle. They slowly start losing themselves. At first, they tell themselves the distance means confusion. They believe the silence comes from overwhelm, not indifference. They assume the pullback is fear, not lack of care, so they wait, they understand, they adjust. And when the distance continues, a more painful thought begins to form. Maybe the problem isn't the situation, maybe it's them, because empaths don't respond to neglect by withdrawing. They don't protect themselves by pulling away. They respond by giving more patience, more explanation, more emotional availability. They soften their needs so they don't feel like a burden. They choose careful words so they don't trigger distance. They hold space even while their own emotional world starts shrinking. And from the outside it still looks like love, but internally something begins to fracture. Confusion replaces security. Self-doubt replaces clarity. Emotional exhaustion replaces hope. The empaths keeps loving, but at the cost of their own sense of self. This is the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It simply accumulates, and that is where the real damage begins. In this video we're going to explore what happens internally when an empath is repeatedly hurt by an avoidant, the silent emotional shifts that eventually change everything. Stage 1. The empath tries harder to be understood. In the beginning, the empath doesn't pull away, they lean in. When the first signs of emotional distance appear, they respond with patience, not because it doesn't hurt, but because they believe understanding will fix it. They choose softer words. They slow their tone. They think carefully before speaking, afraid that saying the wrong thing might create more distance. Instead of demanding clarity, they explain their needs gently. They frame their feelings in a way that feels less threatening. They avoid conflict, not because there is nothing to address, but because they don't want the avoidant to pull away even further. Inside their mind, the empath begins translating pain into compassion. They're stressed. They don't know how to express emotions. They're scared of closeness. Each excuse feels reasonable. Each explanation feels loving. So the empath adjusts again and again. They communicate more clearly. They become more emotionally articulate. They learn how to ask without sounding needy. And when that still doesn't bring closeness, they ask for less. They lower expectations. They minimize their needs. They accept inconsistency just to keep the connection alive. If replies come late, they understand. If affection feels inconsistent, they rationalize it. If emotional availability disappears, they wait. Internally, the empath holds on to a powerful belief. If I love correctly, this will work. They believe love is something you do better, not something you demand. They believe patience will eventually create safety. They believe that if they can just show enough understanding, the avoidant will finally feel secure enough to stay emotionally present. But what the empath doesn't see yet is the cost. Every adjustment drains emotional energy. Every unspoken need weighs on the nervous system. Every moment of self-silencing creates internal tension. The empath becomes hyper-aware of the avoidant's moods. They read tone shifts. They analyze silence. They scan for emotional cues, so they can respond perfectly. Their focus slowly shifts away from their own needs and onto managing the relationship. And while the empath is doing this internal labor, the avoidant experiences something very different. They don't see the effort. They don't feel the emotional strain. They only feel the comfort of not having to change. The relationship becomes easier for them. There's less confrontation, less emotional pressure, less accountability. The avoidant begins to feel safe, not because closeness increased, but because demands decreased. And the empath mistakes this temporary calm for progress. They think, this is working. They believe, if I stay like this we'll be okay. But what's actually happening is quieter and more dangerous. The empath is teaching themselves that their needs are negotiable, that their discomfort should be managed internally, that love means constant adjustment, and while they are busy trying to be understood, they are slowly becoming unseen. This stage feels hopeful on the surface. It feels like effort, it feels like love, but underneath it, the empaths is already beginning to disappear, one compromise at a time. Stage 2, self-blame and emotional shrinking. When effort doesn't bring closeness, the empaths doesn't accuse, they internalize. After trying to communicate better, love harder, and adjust endlessly, they start turning the question inward. Not why won't you show up, but what am I doing wrong? Slowly, self-blame begins to replace clarity. They begin questioning themselves in quiet moments. Am I too sensitive? Am I asking for too much? Why can't I just be easier to love? These questions don't come from insecurity alone, they come from exhaustion. The empaths has already tried patience, they've already tried understanding, they've already tried lowering expectations, and when none of that brings emotional closeness, the mind looks for another explanation. So the empaths minimizes their needs. They stop bringing up feelings because every conversation feels risky. They learn which emotions are safe to express and which ones cause distance. They begin editing themselves in real time. They choose silence over tension. They choose peace over honesty. They choose connection over self-expression. Over time, this self-silencing becomes automatic. Inside, their emotional world starts shrinking. Feelings that once felt alive and expressive are now muted. Joy feels quieter. Sadness feels heavier. Hope feels fragile. They feel lonely even while connected. Sitting next to someone yet feeling emotionally alone. They feel unseen even while giving everything. Because their effort is invisible and their pain is unspoken, they feel guilty for wanting reciprocity, as if needing emotional presence is asking for too much. The empath starts carrying the emotional responsibility for the relationship alone. They monitor the avoidance moods, they anticipate withdrawal, they prepare themselves emotionally so the distance hurts less. Meanwhile, the avoidant experiences relief. There's less emotional pressure, fewer difficult conversations, more space. From the outside, things may look calmer, but internally the empath feels less alive. They begin to lose touch with their emotional truth. They stop trusting their instincts. They doubt their right to need anything at all. Love starts to feel like work instead of connection. Presence starts to feel conditional, and self-expression starts to feel dangerous. This stage doesn't break the empaths suddenly, it compresses them. Their emotional range narrows, their voice softens, their needs become whispers. They are still loving, still loyal, still invested, but they are slowly disappearing inside the relationship. And the most painful part, they don't blame the avoidant, they blame themselves. They believe if they could just be less emotional, less expressive, less needy, then closeness would finally be safe. But what they're really doing is sacrificing pieces of themselves to maintain a connection that no longer nourishes them. And while the avoidant feels less pressure, the empath feels something far more devastating. They feel less alive than they used to be. Stage 3, emotional numbness and inner shutdown. Repeated hurt changes something fundamental inside the empath, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, in ways that are easy to miss. The empath doesn't cry as much anymore. Not because the pain is gone, but because crying no longer brings relief. Tears stop feeling useful when nothing changes afterward. They don't explain like they used to. They stop rehearsing conversations in their head. They stop searching for the perfect words that might finally make the avoidant understand. And somewhere along the way, they stop hoping for emotional repair. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of fatigue. This isn't healing, it's emotional protection. The empath's nervous system adapts to repeated disappointment by shutting certain doors. Hope becomes dangerous. Expectation becomes painful. So numbness replaces longing. The ache that once lived in their chest dulls. The desire for closeness quiets. The emotional highs and lows flatten into something neutral and manageable. Silence replaces communication. They speak less about their inner world. They share less vulnerability. They stop reaching for reassurance. Not because they don't care, but because caring openly has proven too costly. Acceptance replaces expectation. They no longer expect emotional presence. They no longer wait for consistency. They no longer believe change is coming. And this acceptance looks peaceful on the outside. The empath appears calm, less reactive, less emotional. To the avoidant, this feels like relief. There are fewer difficult conversations, less emotional tension, less pressure to engage. The avoidant mistakes this quietness for stability. They think the relationship has settled, They believe the empath has finally adapted, but internally, something very different is happening. The empath is preparing to let go. Long before they physically leave, they begin imagining life without the relationship. They start emotionally rehearsing separation. They slowly detach their sense of safety from the connection. They stop investing emotionally in the future. They stop planning with expectation. They stop anchoring their emotional well-being to the avoidant. This preparation is subtle and private. There are no threats, no ultimatums, no dramatic distance, just a gradual withdrawal of emotional energy. The empath is still present, but not fully engaged, still kind, but less vulnerable, still loving, but no longer attached to outcomes. This stage is dangerous precisely because it looks like peace. The avoidant feels safer, more comfortable, less challenged, but the empath is quietly closing doors inside themselves. By the time the avoidant senses the distance, the empath has already grieved the relationship internally. The bond is loosening, the attachment is dissolving, and the most painful truth is this: the empath doesn't shut down to punish, they shut down to survive, because after repeated hurt, emotional numbness becomes the only way to stay intact. And when an empath reaches this stage, leaving is no longer an emotional decision, it's an inevitable one. Stage 4. Detachment without anger. The final stage isn't rage, it isn't resentment, it isn't emotional retaliation, it's clarity. After everything the empath has tried, patience, understanding, self-sacrifice, silence, a simple truth finally settles in. I can't love someone into emotional availability. This realization doesn't arrive with drama, it arrives quietly, almost gently. The empath understands that effort cannot replace willingness, that empathy cannot substitute emotional presence, that love alone is not enough when connection is one-sided. And with that clarity, something shifts. They stop chasing, not as a strategy, not to create fear or reaction, but because the urge is gone. They stop initiating conversations that lead nowhere. They stop checking in emotionally without receiving anything back. They stop trying to prove their worth through effort. They stop explaining. They no longer search for the right words. They no longer translate their feelings into something easier to accept. They no longer justify why their needs matter. They stop waiting. They stop waiting for replies. They stop waiting for consistency. They stop waiting for change. This is the moment their nervous system finally rests. The hypervigilance disappears. The emotional monitoring ends. The constant readiness for disappointment fades. For the first time in a long time, the empath feels regulated. And this detachment is calm, not cruel. There is no bitterness in it, no desire to punish, no need to be understood anymore. The empaths isn't angry, they're finished. They still wish the avoidant well. They still understand their wounds. They simply no longer carry them. By the time the avoidant notices the emotional distance, the empath has already disconnected internally. From the avoidant's perspective, the shift feels sudden. The empath seems different, less reactive, less available, less emotionally invested. But internally, this detachment has been forming for a long time. It began with self-blame, it deepened with numbness, and now it has solidified into certainty. The empaths has reclaimed their emotional energy. They redirect it inward, toward rest, stability, and self-respect. They no longer argue for closeness. They no longer negotiate their worth. They no longer abandon themselves to maintain connection. This stage is irreversible, not because the empaths has closed their heart, but because they have opened their eyes. They see the relationship clearly now. They see the imbalance. They see the cost. And clarity brings peace, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of alignment. The empaths doesn't leave in chaos, they leave in silence. And that silence isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. Why the avoidant feels it too late. Avoidants often feel relief first. When the empaths finally stops explaining, stops asking, and stops reaching emotionally, it feels lighter. There's less pressure, less expectation, less emotional demand. The silence feels like space, but relief doesn't last forever. Slowly, absence begins to replace comfort. The emotional safety the empath provided, without conditions, is no longer there. The quiet presence that once softened stress disappears. The understanding that required no effort vanishes. And only then does the avoidant start to feel something unfamiliar, loss, not the loud kind, the empty kind. The empaths didn't leave to punish. They didn't leave to teach a lesson. They left to survive. They left because staying meant losing themselves completely. And when the avoidant finally feels the weight of that absence, a painful realization sets in. The empaths didn't stop loving suddenly. They didn't wake up one day and turn cold. They stopped hurting. They stopped enduring emotional neglect. They stopped carrying the relationship alone. They stopped silencing themselves for connection. And by the time that happens, returning is no longer possible, because what the avoidant is missing now isn't just the person, it's the version of the empath that no longer exists. The one who waited, the one who explained, the one who loved without boundaries. That version was lost during the relationship. What remains is clarity, and clarity doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't reconsider. This is why avoidants feel the pain too late, because they feel it only when comfort is gone, not when effort was being given. Some lessons arrive after the door has already closed, and some connections end not because love was absent, but because self-preservation finally became stronger than hope. If this video resonated with you, or if you've lived through an empath's avoidant dynamic like this, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you want more videos exploring emotional psychology, attachment styles and deep relationship dynamics, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you don't miss what's coming next.